Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight on Soul School Sojourn. And class is in session. As you all well know, your teachers are also your students. You are the teachers, you are the students. We're all in this together in this thing called Soul School. It's been a trying week. I know it has been for you too, Jeff. You had a big upheaval in terms of moving a child to another state. Yikes. See, that is for me, that's just another reason not to, feel the need to breed. And I was very fortunate in that respect. I'm just much better with dogs and cats. But I thought a lot this week, and we were touching base while you were down south, and you were actually further south than I am now. So that felt a little strange coming out of Michigan, but when you sending me pictures of palm trees, I do feel like I'm in an alternate universe, just so you know.
Yeah, right. Came back to a snowstorm, so.
And then came back to a snowstorm, yeah.
Balance, yep.
Yeah, I guess. But this has been a very contemplative week for me. Well, from last week into this week as well, because we all know that there's a lot of changes going on and some stuff that really feels sickening to me. And so I was trying to bring it down in my mind to the best common denominator, and to find a metaphor for this period of time in history that we're living in. And it just struck me that it should be the starfish. And, everybody knows the story of the starfish that's been taken in, out of its humble abode from a storm that has swept on shore and has deposited, each one of these inimitable creatures on the hot sand. And, their survival, most of them dry up and die because they lose their ability. If you see film footage of starfish as they, tumble across the sand on the bottom, on the ocean floor, they are the most graceful, gentle creatures. They move with such ease and grace. But once they are deposited on the sand because a wave just brought them in and just left them there, their time is short at that point. If someone doesn't do something to help them, they will die for no reason other than all those people that just walk past them, oblivious to them, or just walk around them, don't take a moment to pick that starfish up that is quite harmless.
Yeah.
And then just toss it back into the surf and give it a chance to live on instead of shrivel up and die in the heat on the sand where it has no mobility and has no opportunity to get itself back to the surf. And while I was thinking about it, I was looking at some pictures. And Bill, if you would be so kind to put one of the photographs up. Yes, thank you, honey. They are such beautiful things, on this planet. They're just lovely. And, there they are hoping that they'll survive until the tide comes in. And thank you, Bill. And maybe sweeps them back out. Or for those of us that are walking the beach that have that feeling of empathy, that have that feeling of, oh my God, what if that was me? That just take a moment to reach down and just scoop that creature up
Yeah.
and lay it and place it into the surf and then just watch it swim out to sea. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, why does it have to be a whale that needs 40 people to a beached whale, that needs 40 people to get it back out, or 50 people because it weighs so much? Is it because it's bigger? Because it's just more obvious? Or is, the humble little starfish somehow less important? I don't think so, personally. And I was thinking about it, and I called them inimitable because, they're each unique and they can't be duplicated. And no two of them, like fingerprints, our fingerprints, no two are alike. They're that individualized. They're that unique on the planet. And so even though they all look alike at first glance, where have we heard that phrase before? Oh, they all look alike. Well, no, they really don't. Really, they're individuals. They can't survive without our help. And I don't know if they have the kind of consciousness that would perceive that helping hand as some kind of divine intervention on their behalf. I doubt it. I think that once they feel the water around their bodies and can move again, that they're just maybe grateful to be back in the water and getting on with their lives. Nor do I know if, as they're laying on the sand and slowly dying, if they're aware of their own mortality, or how close they are to perishing. If they have some element of consciousness to them, we don't know that. But they have a circuitous existence from the ocean to the sand, and then if they're lucky, back into the ocean. And in a lot of ways, we have a circuitous existence, very similar to their own. And, if someone is just cognizant, not, walking past them oblivious to their existence, but cognizant of the stress that little creature might be in at that moment, and takes them and picks them up, I think that not only do we do right by the starfish, we do right by ourselves. We do something whenever we do something to help another, we're really helping ourselves and we're feeding our soul. And I really do believe that that's part of our reason for being here, is to help each other. And so to go through this week feeling like that whole concept got turned on its head really made me think about this. And so I'm not trying to stir the pot. I just want people to think about this way, just for a moment. Okay. This drug right here, this drug comes in a pack, and it's hard to open. And inside it, I have to take these pills every day. This is chemotherapy in pill form. It's what it looks like. And each one of these is a very hard plastic cover, and the back has a very thick binding. And after you break them out of their pack and ingest them, then you're supposed to go wash your hands because you're radioactive. So they want you to get the radioactivity off your hands, but you're supposed to eat it. So, and that's what I do every day. And this drug right here, Kisqali, and this drug, letrozole, which I have to take every day for the rest of my life, how long or short that is. um, suppresses the hormones that feed breast cancer. So that's why I have to take this drug for the rest of my life, to keep those hormones at bay. 5 or 6 years ago, this was an experimental drug. There were clinical trials on this drug. I was not a part of that yet. Now it has been FDA approved because of its efficacy. It is literally keeping me alive and killing the cancer tumors in my body without having to have a port inserted and going to the hospital for infusions of chemotherapy. We've moved past that in a lot of cases. That said, that drug was a product of research that was funded by the National Institute of Health. It is now on the market. And even though it is, I signed paperwork that gave my oncologist permission to share all of my test results with the Center for Disease Control, CDC, right here in Atlanta, so that they can track my progress, so that the next round of Kisqali may even be more effective, have less side effects. I am just now, after 5 months, 4.5 months on the drug, just starting to lose my hair now. I've been very fortunate. My side effects to this drug have been practically nothing. There are hundreds of thousands of people in this country right now who are in clinical trials for experimental drugs that were developed through the National Institute of Health and are being tracked by the CDC, not just in this country, but in other countries around the world. So not only are they developing this amazing work in the conquering of cancer, but then when they have success, like with this drug, they share it with, and I used to be, the pharmaceutical companies, oh my God, you can't even watch one news broadcast without getting 16 commercials, and I still have issues with that. But I will tell you that this drug costs $15,000 a month. The copay on this drug is $3,000 a month. I don't have that. They're giving me this drug and tracking me and my progress on this drug, and I'm one of their star patients. I am having such an incredibly positive reaction to it. So to withhold the funding for this, to stop clinical trials dead in their tracks when somebody is involved in a trial that has to be closely regulated, closely monitored, watched, sometimes tracked weekly in terms of their progress. These clinical trials are very, very detail oriented, very factually based. Data, data, data. So I'm part of the data now. And in my way of thinking about this, I feel like this past week, a storm came through and I was just a little starfish on the floor of the ocean, just doing my own thing, trying to get through and this thing called life. And this storm came through and just deposited me on hot sand. And for a moment, I lost hope that we were going to be able to accomplish this great desire to abolish cancer in our lifetimes, to cure it in all its incarnations. And there is a drug right now that is being developed that shows great promise And I know that this is hard to believe, and I can give you all the data on it. But it is in trials right now and in lab animals. It is curing breast cancer in these animals with one shot, one injection, and all the cancer dies, just liquefies and dies. And the tumors shrink away and they go away, and there's nothing left. And that's what they're working on right now. And we came within a hair's breadth of having all of that suddenly, inexplicably, and unilaterally canceled with the stroke of a Sharpie. And I have to tell you how hopeless and how helpless and how frightened I was that we, the scientific community, the medical advancement community, the people who are doing this research, who were told to shutter their doors and close down their labs like that's an easy thing to do, and stop all of their experiments, which null and voids all of the experimentation. You can't go, from A to Z and stop at J and think that that trial is going to have accurate factual information at the back end of it if it is stopped right in the middle. And it created a great, to our credit as a society, a great uproar. I spent 3 hours on the phone that morning after an executive order was signed to just basically shut it all down, just stop it all, end the funding, retract all of it. I spoke to both of my senators, one of my representatives, and left a message at the White House. And I haven't been arrested yet, so that's a good thing. But I was horrified because I believe that to take hope from the most vulnerable among us, the starfish on the sand, when it would just be so easy to lean over and lift up that little creature and toss it back into the surf and let it live. So easy. And to walk past it and to ignore it, to me, is amoral. And I've often said, how can you have a crisis of conscience if you don't have a conscience? You can't. But what I ask people to do is to think in terms of expressing, finding. If it's been killed off, I'm so sorry. But if there's even an inkling of empathy left, caring, putting oneself in the shoes of another for a moment and feeling their feelings, experiencing their emotions, their fear, their trepidation, their sense of abandonment. When we intervene on behalf of each other, I think that in a way that is a form of divine intervention. Mm-hmm. And so for everyone out there that picked up the phone and registered a complaint or an objection about such a unilateral, sweeping decision being made with absolutely, obviously no forethought, no planning, no adjustment made, with nothing but, this is my wish list, I want all this money back, swoosh. I want to thank everyone out there that took a moment to be appalled by what was happening, and then took a moment to intervene and make a phone call, because it was the flood of the outcry of people all over this country that stopped it on the same day that it started. And the bulldozer got put in reverse and removed from the beach before it had a chance to crush every starfish that was stranded in the sand. And that is all I have to say about that. And if somebody wants to accuse me of being political, guess what? The whole world is political. Let's just look at it for what it is. And with the changing of the guard came a changing of attitude. And, I count. I look at Congress arguing over who should or should not have any particular role at, NIH or FBI or this one or that one or the other. And I sit there and I look at them and I think, I pay your health insurance. You have the best health insurance in the world. All of you do have the best health insurance in the world. And I pay for it. And you pay for it. And we all pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
And then have the audacity to talk about how to cut Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security so that safety net for the least among us, the most needy among us, the elderly population, the chronically ill, those fighting a dread disease like cancer, have just a modicum of hope. And for anyone out there that's willing to strip that away, I say they do not belong in any position of power where they can do that kind of damage to the people that they swear to uphold and defend, along with a constitution that they ignore. So that said, I open the floor to you, Jeff.
Yeah.
My throat is raw tonight. So please pardon me. I've been sneezing all day. I don't know why. But it is a side effect also. Sneezing, for some reason, is a side effect of this drug. So if I sneeze, pardon me, I did bring my tissues.
Yeah.
Me, in case I cried or I sneezed or leaked in any unseemly way.
Okay. My throat is I'm getting over strep throat myself, actually. So I was sick on the last show, and that's kind of what was going on with me. So
yeah, aren't we a pair, huh?
I know, right? The only good thing, I'm getting past the stage right now where I can shift into like a deeper, like Barry White voice. Now I'm just at the part where it's scratchy. So, but there were a couple days there where I could be like, I could look at my wife and be like, "Hey, baby," it was pretty great.
Hey,
but
baby.
I can't. I'm not there now. So I won't do that. Well, Andrea,
not live on TV anyway.
No, not live on TV. But Andrea, my dear friend, I'm sorry for the hopelessness you felt this past week and for everything you went through with all that. And,
yeah, the stress was awful.
Yeah.
Awful. I didn't know whether to sob or to scream.
Yeah.
So I did some of both.
Yeah. And that's what you got to do sometimes, both to yourself and to whatever ears out there are listening. That yeah. So I'm sorry, and my prayers were definitely with you this week, despite everything that was going on. But
I know, I knew you knew what I was going through, and because I made it very clear to all of my circle,
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not that I didn't in some way expect it. I just didn't expect it so soon and without any thought being put into it, or maybe we can trim here and trim there. Maybe there's a duplicate study that we could combine, to look at this in a way that maybe cuts some costs but doesn't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Sure.
Well,
and I think the starfish illustration is really just a perfect, or the metaphor it's a perfect metaphor for this, I mean, because I don't care if somebody's left or right or center. What we do when we
decent it counts for a lot. Being a decent human being counts for so much.
Yes, because when we think only through the filter of ideology, right, which is always binary, even middle of the road, even nonpartisan is still binary, whether it just is. When we think in those terms, we think in terms of systems, right? Which means we're zoomed out so far that we don't see the individual pixels, let's say, that make up the picture that we're looking at. We zoom out so far, all we see is a blob of whatever it is we want to perceive it as being. We slap a label on it and we want to wage war against a system, whether someone's on the left or on the right. When we think only in terms of ideology, we see systems, not people who maybe don't even make them up because maybe they're not all that passionate, but maybe there's just an issue or two here and there that cause them to cling on to it because we're given a binary and we're told these are all you have to choose from anyway. So of course, but then we wage war against everyone who's attached to that system, forgetting that this system is made up of people, right? Or and that's what we do. We forget that this beach is full of starfish. We zoom out so far, we don't see the starfish that's dying on the beach. We don't see that because we're zoomed out so far. All we see is the system that contains these things. And we don't realize that when we wage war against a system, rightfully or wrongfully, whatever, when we do, everyone who's attached to it suffers. And that's just the problem. Chesterton called it, and this might not have been exactly what he had in mind, but it's how I like to think about it. He talked about the war between the microscopist and the telescopist. The telescopist looks so far out that he forgets the nearness of things. And the microscopist looks so deep down into the system that he forgets the vastness of things. And one loses touch with reality by looking too close. The other loses touch with reality by looking too far out. And when we wage war against systems, we're looking at the, we always say, look at the big picture. Sure, look at the big picture. But don't forget the big picture is made up of tiny little brush strokes.
Yes.
And every one of those brush strokes has a heartbeat and a consciousness and a life and a family and value. Yes, obviously. And sum it all up with value. They have memories of childhood. They have they're a life. And that life matters. And it's like, whatever system one is a part of, sure, because you're a part of that system, you might feel a responsibility to wage war against this thing or that you might genuinely think is a bad thing. I'm convinced that I don't think people can really control what ideas take hold of them. Ideas take hold of people, and I think like a virus, like anything else, they get taken over by ideas. They're like pathologized, and they become controlled by them. And I believe that. So it's like, okay, so whatever idea has taken over someone, well, within that context that you now exist, you might feel like you have to wage war against this thing or that. But like, if you have you just can't forget what makes up the thing that you're throwing stones at. You know what I mean? It's like, you hate this house on your block. You think it's ugly. They don't keep their lawn right or whatever. And so you're going to burn the house down because it's an eyesore. And it's like, well, there's a family that lives in that house. You know what I mean?
And did it ever occur to you that maybe they don't have the money to fix their broken lawnmower and you've got a perfectly good functional one in your garage and you could just run it down the sidewalk and say, I'll be happy to do your lawn for you.
So instead of burning down the system,
you have a new neighbor that you suddenly care about because you know them. And then you find out what their story is. And they came across some hardship and somebody lost a job in the family and the lawnmower is broken down and they can't afford to repair it. And then you be the person that says, you know what? Mine's in my garage. Anytime you want to use it, just come get it. And that's the way to live. When you look down at that starfish, that solitary being in the sand, it can't look back and say, I want to live. It can't tell you that. You have to intuit that it is a living being that wants to continue to live. And so with the least amount of effort and the most joy that it could bring you, you lift it up and you save its life.
Because anybody who has worked with, let's say, troubled sectors of the human race, right?
I'm one of them.
Yeah, I mean, whatever it is, abusers of substances, maybe people who are whatever it is, right? Violent, afflicted with this, that, or the other. It's just so easy to put people in a group. It's so easy to throw all these people in a box, slap a label on that box, and then hate the box and the label that it bears, right? And you're just like, oh, dregs of society. These are the problems. But if you hopped inside of the box and you started talking with those souls you threw in there and labeled as this, that, or the other, and you start to learn each individual story, you're like, oh, yeah, I mean, maybe on the surface, it manifests as you're a bad mother. However, when I hear about all the abuse you endured, when I hear about, let's say, the mental illness that you have that's gone untreated for years and years and years, and how it wore on you and wore on you and wore on your relationships, and when I hear of whatever, okay, well, now I start to think a little bit differently. And then I turn to my left and there's the, deadbeat dad or something like that. And there are people out there who fit every stereotype. But
or the stereotypes would not exist.
Of course.
If they didn't have someone that they were applicable to.
But for the most part, if you get down in the trenches with people and hear their stories, you realize, number one, okay, you're not just all a photocopy of one another. So you don't all just belong in the box with this label. You're individuals with individual issues and stories and problems that landed you in the situation you're in. And the situation you're in is as unique as you are. And it's just, I was a pastor for so many years, and, you encounter, excuse me, people of all walks of life. And, at first, there's times where you just make a snap judgment about somebody. You're like, oh, I've encountered this kind of person before, oh, I've seen this before. You know what I mean? Oh, you know what I mean? And you can get jaded after a while because you see so many things. You try to help people who are in certain situations. The help is either not received or it's received in a way that, well, it's not the way you would like for it to have been received. And, you get jaded after a while and you're like, I know this type of person. No, you really don't.
No, you really don't. And
you
it's
really don't.
easier to isolate than to engage.
Yes, it is.
And I see an awful lot of that happening.
And that's how that's how we evolved to be. We categorize things. We throw things in boxes, and it helps us. It helps us if we see the world as systematized and very neat and very clean. Studies have shown if you don't go to the store with a grocery list, a way that you can remember exactly what you need is put everything in a category mentally. Okay, I need things that pertain to dairy. So I need milk, I need half and half, I need cheese, I need sour cream, I need butter. Okay, dairy. I need grains. If you put it in those boxes, you will more than likely remember it if you categorize it. We evolved that way. It helps us if we categorize things. So it's like it's a cognition that helped us to survive. But as with so many of these things, we get to a point where we're misapplying it. You know what I mean? And we start to throw people in boxes, and it helps us. Oh, predator, prey. That's how we see things. I'll never forget. I was a kid. I was like, I don't know, maybe 9 or 10. And I was at the church my dad pastored up in northern Michigan. And this woman got up during a testimony service, which was that really dangerous service where you kind of just let anybody grab the mic. And so like sometimes it was great and it was moving and tear jerking. And then other times
it was like, give me the mic back.
Yeah, I was going to say other
times, the mic. Yeah.
We'd have some interesting conversations on the way home from church about what went down. But this one time, she was a great family friend, but just a larger than life Southern belle kind of woman, and she gets up and
careful.
No. But I'm
like half damn Yankee and half Southern belle, that.
I know. I just mean like, I don't know, she's just like a beautiful lady. I loved her, but she grabs the mic, and she normally, when she would grab the mic, she'd just start like preaching and testifying and doing what one normally does when they're holding a mic in church. But this time she pointed up on the platform to one of the like most influential people in the church, a board member, but who was like very influential guy. And she just points at him and she says, "I hate that man." And everybody in the church just went, "What?" And she just starts trembling and crying and says it again, like with passion, "I hate that man." And then she went on to tell a whole story about how she was abused all of her life by a man who looked exactly like that person. And it was kind of maybe an odd way of communicating this, but it was, I guess, therapeutic for her. But it was her way of kind of confessing that and saying, you know, I've carried a grudge against you and I've misjudged you, and I'm sorry, you know, but because you remind me of this person, I have this hatred in my heart towards you. And, you know, they kind of hugged and were like, hey, you know, it's okay. But my point was, what stuck with me all these years is how she mapped a face of someone who hurt her, and then the rest of her life, just those facial features, you know, the way the hair was combed reminds her of that.
What an impression it must have made for
Yeah.
it to have that effect on her lifelong.
Yeah. And then this guy who was I mean, so far as I know, was a great man, great husband and father, good person. But because of the pain, the genuine, legitimate pain she experienced, it caused her to take this person and put him in that spot. And so sometimes we categorize, it's evolution. It's how we survived. Things that hurt us, we throw in certain boxes. You know, certain colors of foods we throw in certain boxes because we know, oh, I saw my friend Trogdor, you know, the knuckle dragging, whatever. He ate that plant and he died. So don't eat that plant bad, you know? And then we evolve these like boxes and categories we throw stuff in. It helps us to survive. But then at a certain point, they stop being useful, right? Like when you hate somebody who just reminds you of somebody, but it's not that somebody, but it causes there to be this, you know, but that's how we function. And we misapply these evolved defaults to situations that they don't belong in. And it causes us to misjudge, and it causes us to even do violence to people that are the least deserving. Because I've always, look, I get flack from people, but it's just kind of the way I'm wired. Is I always try. I think it's very easy for me to see things from the perspective of like a person who is being put in harm's way. Much harder for me to see the perspective of the one who is putting them in harm's way. But I have tried to, over the years, be very deliberate in trying to understand the mindset of even someone like that. Because most of those people go home at the end of the night and are good mothers, fathers, spouses, not the evil, you know, Hitlerian henchmen we would imagine them to be in our darkest moments. They're not. But then when they're in a certain position and in a certain context, they kind of snap into this role and mode, and they'll do things that are extremely harmful. Well, it's because it's survival. They think this is what they have to do. Or maybe like the lady who stands up in the testimony service and says, I hate that man. It reminds me of somebody who hurt me. Maybe there's even, you just don't know why people are the way they are. And everybody is a complex bundle of complexities. And we have to, like, in some way, everyone is a starfish washed up on some beach.
Yeah.
Even the people
stranded here. All of us are.
Yeah, even the ones that it is very hard to see that way are themselves starfish washed up on the shore of their own ego, washed up on the shore of their own megalomania and pain, and they act out of this. And sometimes those people who are the most wounded end up in and with power, and people suffer because of it. But even so, they're still just a big starfish, maybe stranded on a bigger beach. And it's like, it's hard to see the world that way sometimes, but like.
But isn't it incumbent upon us to try?
It is.
Isn't it? To reduce down to its most simplistic form. You know, we've talked so many times about, you know, every major theological treatise ever written includes some version of the golden rule.
Absolutely.
That is the one thing, the one concept that all of them have in common.
Yes.
And basically it boils down to do unto others as though you were the others, because to someone you are the others.
Yes.
Now, that's really what it comes down to. Love thy neighbor as thyself.
Yep.
Well, how can you love your neighbor when you loathe yourself? It begins with exploring our own soul and coming to terms with our own existence and finding a way to love ourselves first.
Yep.
And I will tell you, I can't tell you how many starfish I have saved in my lifetime. I don't know. A lot. Growing up in Rhode Island, going to the beach pretty regularly, I've saved a lot of starfish and the occasional horseshoe crab. But it comes down to that realization of oneness.
Yeah.
My dear Jeff, we've talked about it so much, that realization of oneness. Essentially, what I am saying is, I love the starfish, and I am the starfish.
Yes. Yep. And that's, the great saints, there are so many quotes that you could distill down to, he who helps the poor helps himself, because that really is the secret, or the poor, or the one who's in need, that when you help someone, you really do help yourself. But then there's the beautiful mystery of that, while there's union, there's also just enough illusory separation that causes us in this simulation to perceive ourselves as being separate from one another, so that it isn't just a selfish act of directly helping myself, but a stepping outside of myself and helping another, that then all of a sudden I realize, oh, in helping the other, I did help myself. So I am the other and the other is me. And I love the way the order is set up, because I do have to step outside of myself to help the other. But immediately upon helping the other, it comes back to me, and it's like, I love that. That's why I love what I would call Trinitarian mysticism in Christian thought, of the notion of Trinity. Like I've said so many times, that's why I tattooed it on my arm, the Trinity knot, these connected loops, right? That represents what in Christian tradition is called perichoresis, or the notion that ultimate reality at its core is this community of beings. In Christian thought, we'd call it Trinity. In another school of thought, you'd call it something else. But that they're in such close union one another that the word perichoresis means to move in a circle, to dance in a circle. And so it isn't that they're one and that they're the exact same being necessarily, but it's that they're moving at this rapid pace of hospitality towards one another at such a speed that they become one. Like the fan blade that we all stare up at and contemplate at night, that it spins so fast it becomes a disc. Right? But it's the movement of it's the movement towards the other that makes the thing one, in a sense. And so it's kind of like, if that is who, or if that's what ultimate reality is, even if you just want to use it as a metaphor, if you boil everything down and you zoomed in close enough, that's what you would see. That movement, right? That the divine is a community that serves one another at such a rapid rate that it's stable oneness. Right? If that's what's at the core of everything, it means that as it moves outward, that you and I are the continuations of that. And when we move in that same direction, we are completing the circle. We are completing the circuit. We are participating in the divine dance ourselves.
Every time we serve dance of divinity. Yes.
Absolutely. No matter how small the act is. That's why, like Matthew 10, I think it says, even if you just give a cup of cold water to one of these little ones, essentially the kingdom of God has come. It's like the kingdom of God. Like what a vast concept.
Right. Exactly. One. But here's the thing. I think that in order for it to be, we use the word altruism, which means to give of oneself with with no expectation of a return. And
Mhm.
yet, once you develop that pattern and that routine of
Mhm.
giving of yourself, and you get that sensation, that feeling of how wonderful it is, it
Mhm.
becomes almost like a narcotic. It becomes, what wonderful thing can I do next?
Mhm.
Who can I help now? Because it feels so good.
Yeah.
But for us to straddle that line of, not doing it because it makes us feel good, but
Mhm.
just doing it to do it with
Mhm.
no expectation of any return,
Mhm.
even though that there is, an emotional um, benefit that
Mhm.
comes automatically, to be able to put that aside and to do good for the sake of doing good,
Mm.
to be kind
Yeah.
merely for the sake of being kind, to be gentle
Mhm.
and sweet and loving and pure of heart, simply to be that.
Yes.
When you reach that awareness, I think that that is a true realization of oneness
I do
has
too.
been achieved.
I do too. And it really is kind of you you forget that you're doing it with reward in mind, but
Mhm,
reward comes. But then the whole thing just becomes like a single movement. You know,
mhm,
the whole thing just becomes one single movement. And it's kind of like I love there's the illustration of the parable of the sheep and the goats in Matthew 25, and
mhm,
it's a parable of like the end of the age. It's not a literal parable, but he's like, okay, at the end of the age, humanity, it's more complicated than that, but just to make it simple, let's just say people are divided between sheep and goats, let's say. Oversimplified, but whatever. We don't have a lot of time. And so the sheep are like basically the ones who have done right. The goats are essentially the ones who have done wrong. And so um, to the goats, he says, when I was in need, you didn't help me. When I was in prison, you didn't visit me. When I was naked, you didn't clothe me. When I was hungry, you didn't feed me. And the goats all say, when did we see you like this? When did we see you, God? When did we see you in need and not help you? And he says, whatever you have not done unto the least of these, you've not done it for me. But they were very quick to defend themselves. They were like,
mhm.
we didn't, what are you talking about? We didn't do that. But the sheep, on the other hand, he says, when I was naked, you clothed me. When I was in prison, you visited me. When I was in need, you gave to me. When I was hungry, you fed me. And the sheep say, when did we see you in need and do this for you? And he's like, whatever you've done for the least, you've done for me. And so the goats were quick to defend themselves and be like, we didn't neglect you. And he's like, every time you neglected the one who could not pay you back, you neglected me. But the sheep had no consciousness of the fact that they were doing anything unto the divine. They
Right.
had gotten so lost in just the act of living and loving that it had become this flow where they were just
Mhm.
doing it and they were reaping the rewards and they were reaping the benefits of living
Completely
it.
unaware. Yeah.
But they had to be told,
Right.
when you do this, you're doing this unto the divine. They actually had to be remembered, whereas the goats were very quick to be like, "Oh no, man, what are you talking about?" I love that illustration, and it's how it's one of the reasons why I've come to see, like, back in my fundamentalist days when the world was very much divided up in between like saved and unsaved, believer and unbeliever, or whatever, that
Mhm.
I began to see, like, some of my atheist friends um, are more sheep than those who claim to be sheep are, you know, because they have no consciousness of a sense of reward. They
Mhm.
have no sense of like afterlife or anything like that. They're unbelievers, and yet
Mhm.
they still live a charitable, loving existence. And then I was looking at other people who are like, claim to be, the righteous of all righteous, and they never lift a finger to help anybody but themselves, And I was like, okay, well, this atheist over here who has no belief whatsoever is very clearly more of a sheep than this person.
Yeah.
And on that day, that metaphorical day, it would actually be the atheist who would have to be told, oh, here's when you clothed me when I was naked, whatever you did for the least. Whereas it would
Mhm.
have been the like hyper righteous person who would have had to have been told, no, you missed it your whole life.
Yeah.
And so it's just one of those beautiful things that there's so many people out there who are completely unconscious of the fact that they are living in this flow and doing exactly what we're talking about. And one of the beautiful things that people like us get to do is just tell them what they're already a part of.
Yeah.
Tell
Just
them,
remind them, because I think that we all
yeah,
do know.
it's an inside joke we already
It is.
know.
We already share. But speaking of
Yeah.
which, I have two very good friends, Sean and Amy, who came for a visit recently.
Mhm.
And when you brought up the story of the goat, I had to go over
Yeah.
to the coffee table and get my little goat that they gave me,
Oh, nice.
standing on his little piece of wood. And this is what they gave me to help me with my stress. Are you ready?
Nice.
That's an actual screaming goat. That's what they sound like when they're
Yeah.
pissed off.
Yeah.
So I let him do some screaming for me this week, which was just delightful and made me smile.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have to find our route back across the sand into the ocean.
Yes.
And when I see the picture of the starfish with just one prong extended and almost touching the water, and I can feel, and just looking at the photograph, I can feel the tide coming in.
Yeah.
And wondering how that creature feels. Does it sense the water at the tip of its star? Does it long to be back into the water where it can really breathe? Does it crave crawling? T.S. Eliot wrote a beautiful poem, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, and one of the best lines in the entire poem is, "I should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas."
Mm.
If we each take a moment to imagine the silence of scuttling across the floors of silent seas and become one with all that we share and all that we love and all that we know in soul school here on this beautiful planet, maybe we will have a deeper appreciation, not only for the planet, but for each other.
Yeah.
And that is my wish. That is my wish tonight. Thank you, Jeff. We're being thrown off the air now. Bill loves us very much, but he's throwing us off the air.
Yeah.
So with that, all that I can say is I love you with all my heart. You are the beacon. You are the light. Each one of us has the chance to be that. So always be the light that you seek. And with that, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Class dismissed.